Did you know that the first Samnite War had a sequel? What we're about to learn today. This is the history of Rome by Magistra Vitae. Bear with me today. I'm a little bit sick, a little bit under the weather, but Magistra Vitae is just the prescription I need. Let's jump right in. The Second Samnite War.
The Roman legions were in hot pursuit of the Samnite army. Passing through the countryside, all the local herdsmen confirmed the same story. The Samnites were busy besieging Luceria. The Romans set up with great haste to aid their ally. They chose the shortest path that led them through a narrow mountain pass called Caudine Forks. When they reached the end of the pass, they realized the path was blocked by
Oh, this is definitely a trap.
large boulders and trees. Realizing something was amiss, they immediately turned around and rushed for the entrance to the pass.
Dang, they built that fence fast.
But when they reached the end, the men realized they were trapped. The whole Samnite army was waiting for them behind a set of makeshift barricades. The Romans had only two options. They could either surrender or die fighting, but we are getting ahead of ourselves. In the aftermath of the Latin War, the Romans enjoyed a period of peace. During this time, the collective Roman psyche continued to evolve, from a close-knit community defending their city from invaders, to conquerors eager to expand their power and influence.
At what time does Rome also encapsulate the Latins, meaning the Latins are Romans?
In these generations, we can see the first traces of the growing ambitions of an empire. The Samnites were unlucky enough to be the first target of these ambitions. There was one problem though. As the Romans were a superstitious bunch, they observed omens concerning all matters of public and private life. This meant that they could only wage war if the gods supported them.
Or they were invaded, right?
In other words, they believed in a concept of casus belli, or simply justified war.
I've heard that so many times before. I didn't know what that meant.
In their own eyes, the Romans were never the aggressors. Rather, they
Never the aggressors, guys. Are you kidding me? Rome? What do you mean?
always had an excuse for why the war in question was defensive in nature. Of course, these justifications for war could be as banal as a perceived insult. They could even be fabricated when the need arose.
Or a rumor, like a rumor.
Therefore, the Romans settled the city of Regula inside the Samnite territory in hopes of provoking a response. But while that was going on, the Samnites were busy elsewhere and they didn't take the bait. Fortunately, the Romans didn't have to wait long for another opportunity to arise. The citizens of the Greek town Naples attacked the Romans living in Campania. Considering that Naples was under the Samnite influence at the time, the Romans requested reprisal from the Samnites. They of course refused, citing the recent settlement of Regulae. In response, the consul Quintus Publilius Philo was sent to deal with the pesky Greeks. Interestingly, during this campaign, a new office was created in the Roman political system. After arriving in Campania, Philo set siege to Naples. Good positioning from the general isolated the Greeks from their allies, and it was only a matter of time before the city fell. The siege dragged on a bit, and Philo's term in office had expired. Realizing that revoking the commander would have a negative effect on the course of the war, the Senate created the office of the proconsul. The proconsul
Yeah, I've heard this a million times. I cannot remember what it is, though.
acted on behalf of the consul, giving him absolute authority over the army, but he was still subordinate to an actual consul.
Okay.
This allowed Philo to take the city without interruptions. In the end, the Romans got their wish, although in a roundabout way. In the year 327 BCE, the Second Samnite War had started in earnest. The following year, Lucius Furius Camillus and Junius Brutus Ceva were elected consuls. Brutus led an army against the Vestinians who allied with the Samnites,
I was about to say, why are they in this? I guess they're just allied and we didn't like that.
while Camillus marched on the Samnites themselves. But before any serious fighting could take place, Camillus fell ill and he was recalled to Rome. There he nominated a dictator, Lucius Papirius Cursor, to take his place. He then chose Quintus Fabius Aurelianus as his master of the horse. Soon after taking command, the dictator was summoned back to Rome. The priests noticed an irregularity with the omens and demanded that Papirius retake auspices. While he was gone, he ordered Fabius to avoid contact with the enemy. But awaiting the dictator's return, Fabius heard reports of the carelessness of the Samnite army. Seizing this opportunity, he ordered a sudden charge upon the enemy. His victory was swift and complete. Livy reports that 20,000 Samnites perished on that day. In his arrogance, Fabius gathered all the spoils from the battle and burned them to prevent Papirius from using them in his triumph. While Papirius
That's weird.
was addressing the Senate, the news of these events reached Rome. Furious, he dismissed the Senate and marched off to deal with his master of the horse. Papirius saw
So we got some infighting happening.
this as an act of disobedience and he was bent on vengeance. Arriving at the camp, he summoned the assembly. In front of the whole army, he chastised Fabius, accusing him of rebellion against the dictator and the whole state. When Fabius in turn accused Papirius of pettiness and jealousy, the lictors were ordered to whip the master of the horse. But the army sided with the young general who led them to a
Big oof.
glorious victory. The soldiers were ready to mutiny, but the night
That's one of the earliest instances where I've seen where you can see an army side with their general over the state, almost.
put an end to these proceedings. In the night, Fabius escaped to Rome and asked his father, Marcus Fabius Ambastus, for help. His father was a respected man, thrice a consul and once a dictator, so his words carried immense weight. On his advice, the Senate met to discuss the events that transpired at the camp. While Fabius was explaining the ruthlessness of the dictator, he entered the Senate house. He learned of Fabius's escape, and he too rode through the night to reach Rome. Papirius demanded that Fabius be arrested immediately, but the entire Senate pleaded with him to reconsider. The tribunes and the people joined the senators, but still he would not budge.
So you have everyone against him. What do you do in that case?
It was only when Fabius and his father fell on their knees and begged for forgiveness that he relented and pardoned the young man.
Yeah, but probably more because of the support that everyone else was giving him.
He ordered Fabius to stay in the city and return to the camp. He didn't receive a warm welcome, as the army was still bitter about the whole ordeal. The very next day, the Samnites engaged
But that's a very crazy, small part of the entire Samnite War.
the army. It is reported that Papirius had shown great military prowess and care in preparing his army. The ground he chose for this engagement, the positioning of his men, and the tactics employed were all impeccable. If only his men showed the same enthusiasm and vigor, the Samnite War could have been brought to a close on that day. Instead, showing their contempt for the dictator, the men deliberately threw away an easy victory. Realizing he couldn't win a war without an army, Papirius changed his approach. He strolled across the camp, visiting wounded soldiers and commending them on their deeds. This soon turned the army back to his side. When the men were ready, he fought another battle with the Samnites, winning a decisive victory this time. The Samnites had no choice but to surrender to the dictator, who referred them to the Senate.
Samnites just do not have a good time against Rome throughout the entirety of history.
Papirius would go on to have a long and successful career, consisting of 5 consulships and 2 dictatorships. Livy,
I mean, never mind. I was about to say, it's not, I guess, if you're chosen dictator, I guess that you are the de facto #1 voice of the republic at that point. So I guess that's sometimes can be viewed even bigger than a consul most of the time, right?
compared him to Alexander the Great, who would die only a few years after these events.
Yeah, parallel.
Livy believed that Rome would withstand the invasion from Alexander, if he ever tried to conquer Rome, but we will soon see how an actual Greek army did against the Romans. While all of this was going on, the second consul Brutus carried out a successful campaign in Vestinia. Following a crushing defeat on the battlefield, the Vestinians abandoned their camp and scattered across the countryside, hoping to find shelter inside the city walls. Brutus then successfully besieged one town after another. When the Samnites eventually sued for peace, the Senate imposed a set of frankly ridiculous demands that the Samnites could not accept. This meant that the fighting would continue while the Romans still held the advantage.
So sorry. So am I getting the fact that we're about to see conquest here? I'm thinking we're going to see conquest.
The following years were filled with light skirmishes and plundering of the Samnite territory, but no major battles were recorded. We will now fast forward to the year 321 BCE, when Titus Veturius Calvinus and Spurius Postumius Albinus were elected consuls. On the other side, we have the first named Samnite commander, Gaius Pontius. Pontius marched his armies in great secrecy towards Caudium. There he hid his camp and sent out men disguised as shepherds to graze some cattle near Calatia, where the Roman army was encamped. If the Romans captured them, they were ordered to tell the same story. The whole of the Samnite army was besieging Luceria, and its capture was imminent. Luceria was a Roman ally, and they had to act to prevent people in Apulia from siding with the Samnites.
Interesting. They got some good spies.
The Romans took the bait, and believing that the time was of the essence, they decided to take a shorter route that would lead them through the Caudine Forks. Caudine Forks is
So here's the intro of the video.
a grassy plain surrounded by mountains on all sides. The only way in or out are two narrow mountain passes placed on each side. The Romans rushed through the first pass without noticing anything. When they reached the other side, they found that large boulders and felled trees blocked the pass. Above the pass, they noticed Samnite warriors observing them. A hasty retreat was made, and the army soon reached the entrance, but it was also blocked. A makeshift barricade was erected, and armed guards were stationed above the pass. The Romans could see the writing on the wall. They were trapped, and trying to fight their way out was hopeless. While lamenting their desperate situation, they built a fortified camp. Pontius was at a loss for what to do in this fortunate situation, and he sent messengers to his father to ask for advice. His message was, "Let the Romans depart at once, uninjured." Pontius knew that his father was no friend to the Romans, so he sent messengers again to confirm this was really his advice, but this time they returned with a different message.
That was weird. By the way, notice there's an alien ship taking a cow in the background. Yo, this is a funny channel.
Kill every last one of them. Utterly confused, Pontius sent for his father. When his father arrived, he explained that both messengers were correct.
Bro can't make up his mind.
Pontius had only two options now. The better option was to let the Romans go and earn lasting gratitude and friendship from the most powerful city in the region. His other option was to kill every man and cripple Rome for a generation.
Yeah, and then when that generation rebuilds, you're screwed.
Despite the sound advice from the old man, the Samnites chose
What do you mean the sound advice? He gave two contradictory points.
the third and by far the worst option they could. The Romans would be freed, but they would have to forfeit their weapons and pass under a yoke. Passing under a yoke was seen as a great insult and a sign of submission in the ancient world. As the old man warned, this act didn't win them any friends, nor did it get rid of any enemies. Furthermore, the Samnites imposed a harsh peace treaty on the Romans that the Senate would have to rectify. As security, 600 equites were held as hostages. The army marched in complete silence back to Rome. During the Senate proceedings discussing these events and subsequent treaties, Spurius Postumius urged the senators to decline the proposal. He proposed that all the religious obligations lay on him and not the people of Rome. That meant that he alone could return to Caudine Forks and surrender to the Samnites. This would then annul the treaty in the eyes of the gods. He was commended for his proposal, and the Senate agreed to decline the treaty and sent him and the other commanders back to the Samnites. When they arrived before Pontius and offered themselves in return for refusing the peace treaty, he was furious. Pontius refused to take them as prisoners, letting them walk away as free men. He demanded that all of Rome's legions be returned to the Caudine Forks, or that the peace treaty be respected. He believed that this bad faith interpretation of the law of nations would backfire for the Romans. On the other hand, the Romans believed that their obligations to the Samnites and to the gods were now discharged, and they returned to Rome.
So they got lucky.
Pontius only now realized that the third option was indeed the worst possible at the time. This turn of events is of course questioned. The surrender of Postumius resembles yet another event from the First
Yeah, that's the Carthage. So we're talking about the Punic War?
Punic War, when a surrendered general urged the Senate to keep fighting and return to Carthage, knowing full well what awaited him there. In the aftermath of the disaster at Caudine Forks, there is a 5-year gap in hostilities between the two nations. We will leave it for you to decide whether this was due to an unfavorable peace treaty or due to the Romans simply biding their time waiting for a good opportunity. Join us next time as we
I'd say this was definitely not a consensus of the ending. Interesting though, very interesting. The Second Samnite War, very similar and parallel to the First Samnite War where they got trapped. Of course, the Apennine Mountains are quite harsh, where the Samnites, of course, derive from. But interesting interpolitics on the Italian peninsula so far. It seems that Samnium is not that much of a pushover as I thought they were initially. They're kind of evenly matched here. I mean, I think the Romans have the advantage by manpower, economy, military, but just the geographical essence of Samnium gives a level playing field in some situations. Nevertheless, we got more videos to go on the Second Samnite War, Magistra Vitae. Appreciate you guys being here. I'll catch you guys next time. Until next time, though, peace out and bye.